Will I get a car?
So we're starting now. And with that, I would welcome our viewers to this overview of General Synod for the United Church of Christ. And our special guest is Lorin Cope, currently with St. Paul United Church of Christ and a former national staff person. So we're going to go through a series of 8 questions this evening. And the first question is kind of a fun one. I'm going to ask Lorin to unpack a term that is often used around Synod, and that term is called Synod Junkie. Can you tell us, Lorin, what a Synod Junkie is?
Yeah, me. I'm a Synod Junkie, for sure. I've attended every General Synod since 1971. I was very young when I went to my first General Synod. And I was looking forward to this one because this would be the first Synod that I would attend where I was not a delegate or an associate delegate or a Synod staff person or somehow an institutional representative. I could just go as a visitor, go to what I wanted to, and in the normal world, hang out at the pool every once in a while, or stroll through the displays, or gather for coffee someplace. But nope, that's not going to happen because of COVID. We're doing this differently. So I want to go on, Craig, and say a couple of other things about that. My first synod was in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1971, and my last one was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin 2 years ago. Some of the other places it's been in St. Louis, in Cleveland, in Columbus, in Long Beach, in Oakland, in Kansas City, in Baltimore, Tampa, Atlanta, Hartford, and Providence. So it's been all over the country. And host cities are usually suggested for a variety of reasons, mostly cost. If we can get a convention center cheap, I think that dictates where we go a lot of times. Many times we meet over the 4th of July, and many times convention centers don't want to rent to people over holidays like that, or people don't want to, the demand for it is less over the holidays. And so we've often gone and met over the 4th of July as we rotate around the country and we look for the size of the convention center and to make sure there's enough hotel rooms. In 2023, we hope to be out of COVID and back to being able to meet in person. And Indianapolis is the place where we'll go. And General Synod meets every 2 years right now. There's ongoing conversation about the expense of that and whether we should go to a different kind of frequency of meeting. And I'm sure part of the conversation will be in person one time and online the next time or whatever. But there's even a conversation at this synod to talk about frequency.
Great.
I could go on, but you might want me to stop there, Craig.
That's probably good. So the next follow-up question is, we've already, prior to our time together, talked about expressions of the church, the local church, the association, conference, and national setting. Can you explain to us the purpose of General Synod and how that brings each of the settings together?
Well, let me turn to a piece that was in the United Church of Christ Bulletin this past Sunday, and it gives one of the best explanations for Synod. The General Synod of the United Church of Christ is the national decision-making body for the denomination responsible for giving general direction to the evangelistic, missionary, and justice programs of the United Church of Christ. Rather than making proclamations to the church, which the church must obey, General Synod is in a real sense a gathering of the church at large. General Synod speaks to, but not for the church, and as we gather together as one, it reminds us of our radical interconnectedness. Since the beginning of this denomination, more than 60 years ago, regular meetings of General Synod have given direction and purpose to the church as a whole, as well as providing an opportunity for thousands of delegates to learn, participate in service and mission projects, attend inspiring worship, and meet up with friends old and new. The theme of this year's General Synod is rooted in love, And the logo shows a tree planted by a river to reflect the words of Psalm 1, verse 3. They are like trees planted by a stream of water. The logo is a poignant reminder of being rooted in Christ's love and the water that flows like a connection between our churches and the other settings of the UCC. Although our gathering will be online instead of in person this year, the elements that make General Synod so special and uplifting will remain. And this was for yesterday's worship. On this Independence Day, we remember and rejoice in our fundamental interdependence as we prepare and plan for General Synod 21. Visitors are welcome at General Synod. Search for General Synod 33 on ucc.org to register. And if you cannot attend all or parts of General Synod this year, keep the church as it gathers in your prayers.
Thank you, Lorin, for that overview of what General Synod hopes to accomplish. And I love the phrase you used, and I would emphasize it, that General Synod speaks to the church rather than for the church. So with that said,
Right. It's also,
oh, I'm sorry, Lorin.
well, I was also going to say that there is a part in our Constitution where it says that, where is it? Oh, I thought I had it marked. Actions by or decisions or advice emanating from the General Synod, a conference, or an association should be held in the highest regard by every local church. And that, kind of makes us different than other denominations where those actions are binding.
That sounds great. So a couple of weeks ago, when a few of us were talking about the United Church of Christ, we noticed that we have a long history of firsts, things that we have done that no other Christian denomination at that point had been able to do. Things like the ordination of the first woman, the first African-American, and the first openly gay man. So with that said, part of those firsts are established are through things that are done at the General Synod called resolutions. And there's two types that are often brought forward. One being resolutions of witness, the second being something called a Prudential Resolution. Could you talk a little bit for a couple moments about what those resolutions are and how they contribute to the life of Christian community?
Sure, but I also want to mention there are some other things that Synod votes on. There are pronouncements and proposals for action that are different. They always come in a pair. You always have pronouncements and proposals for action, and you don't have proposals for action standing alone without pronouncements. And those are, a pronouncement is a statement of Christian conviction on a matter of moral or social principle that has been adopted by 2/3 vote of the General Synod. These are normally considered to be issues for the whole church. And then, as Craig said, there are resolutions, and they're broken down into the two groups. This started about 15 years ago, and I was part of making this happen. There are resolutions of witness where the General Synod is speaking to groups outside the church, and they require a higher level to pass. They require a 2/3 vote of the delegates. And then there are prudential resolutions where we are speaking to the church, internally to the church, and they require a simple majority to pass. So there's really three different kinds of actions: pronouncements and plans of action, prudential resolutions, and resolutions of witness.
Beautiful. And an example of the power of resolution of witness, for instance, if I remember correct, in 2005, fully a decade before gay marriage was legalized, the United Church of Christ at its synod called for the legal recognition of marriages and became the first Christian denomination to do so. So that's a great example of how General Synod can shape not only the future of the United Church of Christ, but of the world. So with that said—
I was on staff.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was on staff when that vote happened, and I was standing on the floor watching the cards go up and the hands in the air, and it was quite an emotional moment. It was quite an amazing moment. It was so silent on the floor of Synod, thousands of people there. This supposed to be maybe the most significant vote General Synod would take at that Synod. And it was an amazing moment when that vote occurred.
Excellent. So I wanted to really emphasize the power of those resolutions. Now, with that said, Lorin, us being the United Church of Christ, there are many voices that partake in the process and form many resolutions. Does every single resolution, whether it be of witness or prudential, come to the floor of General Synod?
No, they don't. I would say most of them do. Some of them get referred, and these recommendations are made to the General Synod. So the General Synod sees the resolution, but a committee called the Resolution Review Team will review the resolutions ahead of time, and they will perhaps make a recommendation that a certain resolution is so consistent with an existing mandate or an existing policy in a current programming agency, that resolution goes directly to that agency. So there's usually no controversy. It's usually something that's already happening and reaffirms that same work. And usually the review team decides we should not use Synod time to say again the same thing we've already said and are working on. Sometimes resolutions, because they may have issues of polity or consistency with the Constitution and bylaws, are sent back to the maker. And often the committee will work with that maker to get it into a shape that accomplishes it coming to the floor appropriately. Sometimes that does not happen. Sometimes the resolutions go right to the floor because they're non-controversial resolutions affirming partnerships with other denominations around the world, or ecumenical partnerships or something like that, where there's going to be celebration and celebratory resolutions, celebrating somebody's retirement, celebrating somebody's significant ordination anniversary that was on the national staff. So those go forward. But the important thing I always want to tell people is that committee does not make those decisions by themselves. When those resolutions are introduced, they really become part of the Synod. And that committee must report to the Synod and say, this is what we have found with the resolution, and we would recommend that you do this. So the Synod controls that by accepting or amending the report of the committee. In the standing rules, it very clearly says that if this General Synod has spoken to the same issue and the current resolution is not changing the previous statement, if that was spoken to in the last two General Synods, it should not go back on the agenda. The idea, of course, is that we've already had it on the agenda, we've already dealt with it, and we should not ask Synod to take time to do what they've already done. It also says that the committee is not supposed to be gatekeepers. So they can't decide an issue. It's just something they don't want to talk about and drop it. They have to decide whether it falls under the appropriate category and then accept it or not, or work with the maker.
Lorin, we do have a question. And for those who join later, we're asking that rather than verbally ask a question, before we break into the Q&A period around 7:45 tonight, that you would type it in the chat window. Cynthia typed in a question and said, is it possible that a workshop or an event at a conference could come forward as a proposal in that same General Synod? Or is there time that's required in advance?
There is time that's required in advance, although I will say there have been things that have come up, and the vote, again, the body controls the meeting, and if something comes up, that issue could be presented and the General Synod could decide whether they want to schedule it on their agenda and deal with it. The example that I think of and thought of right away was in 1973 when General Synod was here in St. Louis. We have always supported the farm workers, and there was a farm worker issue in the Coachella Valley. And at Synod, they raised the money and chartered a United flight to fly a full flight of people to California to join Cesar Chavez in the work he was doing in the Coachella Valley, and then flew back to Synod to tell us what happened. I was 17 at the time, and I stood in line hoping I could buffalo them into letting me go, but they said no. So
Right.
I couldn't go, but I tried.
You can see why I invited Lorin tonight, because there are things that you can read about in a book or a report, and then there are these stories. And to have one from 48 years ago pulled out like that and shared is a great witness for what General Synod is all about. So having said that, let me move to the next question. In some traditions that would be described as Episcopal, meaning top down, like the Catholic or the Methodist Church, when a body like General Synod meets, rules are passed and all local churches are forced to comply. But in our tradition that's not Episcopal, but congregational, every local church can decide whether or not it chooses to listen to and be informed by General Synod. So with that said, why do we even bother with these things called resolutions if they're not rules that are binding? Why do we do it?
Well, it does give us a taste for all of us about where a part of the church is. You know, they're all supported by individuals, by conferences, by local churches who have felt something they want to bring to the national setting. You're right, they're not binding on the local church because that's not who we are. The local church, in my utopian view of how the United Church of Christ ought to be, every single one of our local churches, every conference, every association ought to have a committee that begins meeting immediately after General Synod or an association or conference meeting and reads all of the resolutions as they were passed and says, now what does that mean for us? How should we consider that? What should we think about this? Should we have a study about this? Should we have a Bible study? Should we have a group that and have a conversation and know that in our polity, if they say no, or this isn't for us, that's perfectly acceptable. Nobody's going to criticize them for deciding not to do something because they, but I think it would be great if our churches would study them. And I think that's one of the things that's really helpful. I've heard of churches around the country where they take the General Synod minutes and they take the actions of Synod and they study them, they talk about them, they dialogue about them in their churches, and then they respond. And that would be great. So they do let us hear this, the voice of the church. There's 11 resolutions this year. I didn't check to see how many pronouncements and proposals for action we have. And you know, they come from a variety of sources. And I think that's one of the beauties is they come from individuals, from different conferences. They come from collections of churches. They come from national bodies. They come from a variety of sources to bring that question or concern to the General Synod's attention, and their educational opportunities for us. We begin to learn about challenges we wouldn't otherwise think about, probably.
Great. So I'm just wondering, we just have 3 questions left before we open this up to kind of more informal conversation. Is there 1 or 2 resolutions that's coming before General Synod this year that you might highlight so that other people are more aware of?
Well, as I said, there are 11 resolutions, and that's a much smaller number than in the past. And I think, Craig, everyone would pick their own actions of General Synod to lift up as the most important. I look down through, there's injustice in the bail bond system, calling for a just peace in Israel-Palestine, declaring racism a public health crisis, calling for a ban on conversion therapy. So all of them are significant, I think, in what they're speaking to in our society right now. And I didn't pull up one that I would advocate. I just looked down through the titles and who was bringing them to the synod.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's a great sort of overview. Gina had asked a question that's a little bit more structural. And so I'm going to veer from the questions for a moment. When you were talking just before our presentation started tonight about the structure of the national denomination and the branches from local church to wider church ministries, etc. Gina asked, in that structure, is there a predominance of any one area of the church over the other three, or how do those pieces of the church get balanced, especially in things like these resolutions and commitments?
So here's the full disclaimer part of my presentation tonight. I have been out of the national setting of the church in terms of planning General Synod for 10 years. There have been a lot of things that have happened as I left the national setting and went to positions in Colorado and then came here to St. Louis. And so I tried hard today to gather as much information. In fact, I got really excited about Synod today because I had to get ready for tonight. And I registered. Craig said he'd be behind me in registering, but looking at Facebook, I was behind Craig. I got myself registered. I had not been excited about Synod until I started to get ready for tonight. And so here's my transition through. Before 2000, I think there was a real struggle in terms of the autonomies of the different boards. One, the Board for Homeland Ministries and the Board for World Ministries, with significant financial resources of invested money, of endowments, and all of this kind of stuff that had been collected ever since 1620. And the president's office, which struggled to survive on the funds it could put together. And so you had a president who had very little power, very little authority, and very little resources. In 2000, we kind of came together. We put all of the investments together in one place. We honored the histories and redistributed the money so that there was a more equitable distribution of the resources for mission. Since 2000, as that structure has been tweaked, my perception, and I left the national staff in 2007, but my perception is that they have worked hard and been successful at the national setting being three ministries where all three of the people share equally in the leadership. Now, one person is the general minister and president, but I think that the sharing of leadership between Tracy Blackman and Georgia, I can't think what her name is. I blanked. I had it a minute ago. I think between the three of them, they have worked really, really hard. I watched a video that was just released in the last few days. All three of them are participated in that video. At Synod, upfront leadership, all three of them. They have worked, I think, very hard at demonstrating teamwork, and of the three of them working very closely together in the leadership of the church. So.
Great. And for our listeners, one thing to sort of emphasize, even when I talked earlier about the four aspects of the church, the local church association, conference, and national, we're very careful not to use the word level, which would imply a hierarchy. Our tradition prides itself on being what's called flat, which means that even the president and general minister sits with the other heads of ministry, not as someone who serves over and above, but rather someone who serves with. And Lorin's answer really showed that very well. Lorin, you wanted to follow up?
Craig, I want to say too, I had a conversation with somebody in another denomination. We were talking about discipline, when discipline needs to happen with our clergy. And I pointed out that if there was something that the general minister and president did that would call into question his fitness for ministry, which is the bar that authorized ministers like Craig adhere to. The Committee on Ministry of the association, where Craig has his standing, would consider whether Craig's fitness for ministry is still intact. The same is true with the president of the church. The president of the church has no special relationship with any setting in the church. He's an authorized minister of the church. Most of the time they have their standing in the Western Reserve Association of the Ohio Conference, having joined a church and the Western Reserve Association. So if there was something that their standing is held there, their discipline is held there, their accountability and responsibility is held there, that's how our system works. So the president doesn't have any special dispensation because he's the president and general minister of the church.
Great. So we have about 5 minutes left and 2 questions. The first of the remaining 2 questions is a little bit more historical. And we've already in some ways talked about these sorts of matters. The first of the 2 questions is, what are a couple of the most significant resolutions or actions that you remember from past synods? We've talked about in 2005, the same gender marriage resolution. We've talked about the farm worker support. Are there another 1, 2, or 3 things that stand out for you?
Yes. So I want to say, I think it was in 1972, Bill Johnson was ordained by the Golden Gate Association of the Northern California Conference. He was the first out gay man to be ordained in the United Church of Christ. And our ordination process is handled by those association committees on ministry. So the decision to do that was not made in the national office. It was made in the Golden Gate Association. It begins and ends in the associations. Some people were upset that an out gay man had been ordained. And so they brought a resolution to General Synod asking the Synod to reverse the action of the Golden Gate Association and to take Bill's authorization for ministry away from it. The General Synod wisely said, we don't have that power. We can't do that. Power for ordination is totally within the life of the association. And I thought that was a fascinating, an amazing moment in the life of the Synod when that happened. The other one I thought of, as you said, marriage equality. I think that the fourth one I wrote down was regarding the new structure that I've referenced several times that took place in 2000. The other one was very personal to me. I was involved in creating the Strength of the Church offering, which is the offering recommended for our churches to receive on Pentecost. And the use of that money goes towards new church development, church renewal, and supporting leadership development as in the form of pastors. And that was an interesting time. I tell all kinds of stories that you shouldn't know about coming to that agreement and the decision of the Synod, and that wisely, the moderator, who was John Kruger from Fort Wayne, Indiana, paused the Synod for dinner, which gave everybody a chance to go eat and think more clearly and come back and deal creatively with the problems before us and solve the matter and pass the offering. So I thought of those personally from my own history, Craig.
Great. And Lorin's example gives us a great way of seeing how the United Church of Christ operates, because the Strengthen the Church offering is suggested on Pentecost. But this year, for a variety of reasons, including COVID and our leadership transition, we at WHCC will be taking that offering on July 18th. And so it's a great way local churches work, listen to, and act on the work of the General Synod. So I couldn't have paid you to do a better commercial for our upcoming offering, Lorin. And our last question this evening, and then I'm going to stop recording and open it to questions. One of the endearing things about General Synod, for those of us who've been blessed with the chance to attend, are some of the traditions or kind of the quirky expressions of life. One of which is the presence of cookies in the gathering halls. Another is a service day. Could you take those two and any others that you would like and explain how those traditions got started as a wonderful and folksy expression of who we are as church?
So most of the time, my observation has been that if the General Synod does something once, we walk away from it and go, wow, that was kind of fun. That was kind of neat. I wonder who came up with that idea. That was okay. If we do it 2 times, people go, oh, this was good last time. I hope it's good this time. If we do it 3 synods in a row, it's like, oh my God, we have to do it. It's now what we have to do. It's written somewhere that this is what we have to do. So the things I thought about were the youth work projects, encouraging more and more youth to come to Synod, finding work projects for them to do. Here in St. Louis in 1993, we had flooding, incredible flooding, and Bishop Desmond Tutu was here. And our youth went out to sandbag along the Merrimack River and along the Missouri River to protect things. And Tutu went out to do sandbagging. He went out in the afternoon. In July afternoons in St. Louis are not a lot of fun, but he went out, and I thought those young people will never forget the chance to do sandbagging with Bishop Tutu. That night he was the preacher at worship, and we do service projects and work projects now. We try to have a positive impact on the city where we are. You mentioned the cookies. I'm trying to remember how we got started on that. I think what it was it was a long session and somebody went out and bought cookies. And the next day we realized that women in the church around the area where the meeting would happen baked cookies overnight. And the next day there were trays of cookies being passed up and down the tables of delegates. And by the next synod, there was a committee planning for cookies, assigning cookies, planning cookie routes to get to synod and store. You know, if you have to store enough cookies for 10,000 people for 5 days. In Columbus, Ohio, when I was the local arrangements chair, we had a huge room in the convention center that just reeked of sugar and chocolate. And after synod, we took the extra cookies and took them out to nursing homes and other places all around Columbus because we were overwhelmed by cookies. Unfortunately, in a lot of places now, the health regulations will not let us bring in cookies from outside. And so that had to stop. The other thing, quickly, Craig, was in one city where we met, and I think it was Indianapolis, there was a significant blood shortage that was on the news when we got there. And so they arranged with the Red Cross or other blood collection agency to do a blood drive. And it was highly successful, and they appreciated the assistance we gave them. Thought it was really good. Again, tried it the next time. And by the 3rd time, people say, well, who's contacting about the blood drive? Who's making arrangements for this? What day will that be? And something to keep in mind, there's a General Synod Planning Committee that's really made up of national staff and folks like that from across the country. And then there's the Local Arrangements Committee. And the Local Arrangements Committee are those people who live in the area of the town or conference where the meeting is happening. And they take care of things like finding the pulpit for worship, managing the cookies, handling the handicapped accessibility issues, making signs, all of the nuts and bolts things that contribute to a successful synod. Recently, we've started to have a big dinner, a big fancy dinner. And it's a fundraiser. Last year, it was our chance to hear the choir from Trinity Church in Chicago, one of our biggest African-American congregations in the church. They brought their entire choir up. Nobody wanted that evening to end. It was great. And so those significant dinners, and those a few years ago, we used to have gatherings we called sponsored dinners. And sponsored dinners were events like where seminaries and agencies could have the program and they could talk to folks who wanted to attend that. Because I worked for Eden for a number of years, we used to gather our alumni and supporters at Synod and have a chance to meet with the Synod, with the seminary presidents and those kinds of things.
Great. Lorin has frozen for a minute. He's having some internet connectivity issues.
Seminary in California,
Oh, you're back with us. Good.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about that.
No problem. So as we wind down, I want to thank Lorin for sharing the wealth of information, and the congregation that Lorin mentioned in that event, Trinity, you may or may not know, was the congregation that President Obama spent a good number of his adult years worshiping in. And President Obama addressed us, I believe, in 2008 at Hartford, Connecticut, at our
Yes.
General Synod. So
Right.
they're wonderful moments in the life of our tradition. So with that, I will bring our presentation tonight to a close and stop recording. Thank you, Lorin, and thank you all for being with us this evening.